The following audio recording has been designed for learning purposes only. Do not share, distribute, or provide any type of copies, or this audio lesson will not be made available to you. Good luck with today's lesson.
I don't know. It's like I didn't remember them, some of them.
Okay.
I was like, you know. And I was 70. And
Did you take it twice?
No.
Why not?
Because I was scared. What if I get 50? Then they'll run it
No,
up.
no. That's not the rule. Okay, can we hold up? This bothers me because no. It's not you bother me, but like this.
Yeah.
I don't know if this was clear. If you ever take a quiz or an exam, and I thought I had said this the first week, but maybe I didn't. If you ever take a quiz or exam, and for whatever reason your second attempt is lower than the first, that second attempt is adjusted to reflect the first one.
Oh,
So yeah, you know what I mean. If you take it, like if you take the first quiz, if you take the quiz once and you get like, I don't know, 17 out of 20, and then you try to take it again, but like you're
13 out of 20.
5 Long Island iced teas deep on a Saturday night, you come home, I'm gonna take a quiz, and you take it and you get like 3 out of 20. Like I'm not gonna, you don't get the 3 out of 20.
So that's
Like I'll
why
round it
I
up.
was like, I don't want to
Yeah,
risk
take it again. Take it again.
Okay,
It's still
okay.
there. Take it again.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Did everybody
maybe-
take the quiz only once, or the exam only once?
Oh, yeah, I took it only once. I could not go through it again.
I know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there's that, right? There's also like, I get that too. Right? Like I'm not doing this to
Yeah, like
myself
for
again.
any other quiz, if I got like a 90, I'd be like, I'll just take it again.
I mean, at the
But
same
got
time,
90 on the exam, I was like, I'm not
I
gonna
mean,
do it
I
again.
know that you all got other things going on. You have other classes, and maybe the idea of taking an exam again and all the prep work that you've got to go through to make it worth your while. Maybe you don't want to do that, but you know, I urge you to take it again if you can. Yeah, of course. Yeah,
On Thursday?
you can take it whenever you want. Yeah, it's available. So that's fine.
Yes, I have one.
Yeah.
Okay, that's crazy.
So yeah, you know, I don't want to. There's a tricky thing here, is where it's like due dates are important to me because I want. Hi, Diamond. By the way, good to see you. Hi, Diamond. I was just saying hello. I realized you came in and so, and I want people to be on schedule because I don't want folks to fall too far behind. It's hard to get caught up. However, education to me is very, very different. I get if you're in the workplace and somebody says, look, we need to have this in by Friday, that yeah, you probably should get whatever you need in by Friday. But schooling is something that's very different, and that's about you knowing the material and understanding the material. And so if folks ever need additional time for anything, I'm always down for that, right? I just don't want to see folks fall too far behind, that's all. Yeah, so a lot of people are like, well, you know, you should run your classroom like a business.
You should
and
mind
I-
your own business.
Don't no, like a business, like a
I know, but
workplace.
I'm
You know what I
saying,
mean? Yeah, I
they
know.
should mind their own business.
But I don't, and I get where they're coming from around things like accountability, right? That makes a lot of sense. But I also, I don't know, my answer to that is like, okay, well then I can pick any random person and be like, you get an E. Or not even, you're flunked, get out of here. Right? Because the workplace in Michigan and across the country is, for the most part, an at-will employment. Do you guys know what at-will means? What does it mean?
Hold on. I've heard it before, and I don't know if it's if it's on the employee side or like I think
It's both. It's both employer and employee. But
it means that they can fire you, and it means that you can quit, basically.
right, you can quit, and you can quit for any reason, right?
And they can
Do
fire
you have to give 2 weeks notice?
No.
No.
That's just like something.
Do they have to give 2 weeks notice?
No.
No. So you can quit at any time, and they can fire you at any time, and for any reason. Now, they're not supposed to fire you for like, you know, women make me nervous, you got to go, right? Can't fire you for, I mean, they can fire you for that reason as long as they don't say it, right? And this is the thing with the way the law is and the way the courts have interpreted discrimination laws. As an employee, even if it's obvious that there's discrimination going on, the proof that you have to have is like, you got to be a mind reader, basically, like, to prove that there's discrimination happening. It's very hard to do. Anyway, but my problem with that is like, I mean, if I really wanted to treat this place like a business, like the power that I have over you is, that's not cool, you know? And you can drop at any time, but should I be able to flunk you at any time? No, you know, that's so, right away it's kind of like, I don't really like that analogy. Is it an analogy or a metaphor? Anybody here take English? I don't know the difference.
Yeah, I'm taking English.
I'm always calling a metaphor an analogy and an analogy a metaphor. I never know what those are. Anyway.
So, what was that word we just said?
Metaphor, analogy, or
No.
at will?
At will.
At will, yeah. So at will employment. We'll talk about that when we get to the section on rights in the workplace.
I'm excited for that section.
Yeah, I am too. It's a fun section.
Did you vote this morning? At
Yes, I did. What's that?
7 in the morning.
Poll opened at 7. I was there at 5 minutes to 7.
I would have went.
Number 1, I was the first voter. Yeah, I was the first voter. White people love to be first. I'm sorry, it's terrible. I did. I was almost like, I was number 1. I'm like, I'm not gonna post that. But yeah, I was the first one.
Can you
And
imagine his wife like in public places and he's just like throwing jokes everywhere? I'll be like, oh my god, stop! You
With
don't
me?
want to offend somebody. Yeah.
no, I don't. I
Yeah.
don't. Yeah, I don't say anything when I'm around my wife. I just let her talk.
She does that.
Very smart.
She's much smarter than me anyway, and I don't want to.
Oh my god.
I just kind of nod and sort of. Anyway, so yeah, and there are 3 other people there this morning. In my precinct, I'm like near Southwest Detroit, like the north end of Southwest Detroit. You guys know what 94?
Yeah.
You guys know 94. So past like the Livernois exit, Cecil, Lanyo, that kind of area, and you head north like a couple blocks, and that's where my precinct is. If there's 100 people that vote there today, I will be astounded. The voter turnout, even like for the actual presidential election, I voted in the evening, so like toward the end of the day, I was like the 400th person to vote. Like 400, like that's nothing, you know,
Yeah.
nothing. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay,
So yes, I did vote.
I always tell my mom, like, is it possible that Obama can be Joe Biden's vice president?
Yes.
What?
Wow.
I don't know, I think so.
He served, but
My
no,
ego
since he
won't
served-
allow me.
He served a full,
My
like,
ego.
But he hasn't, this wouldn't be a consecutive, right? If
Yeah.
if Obama is Biden's vice president,
yeah.
and Biden passes away or is incapacitated and can't serve, to my understanding, yes, Obama could then be president.
Oh,
Yeah.
I thought they like had had a bill on that or something.
The law is you're limited to 2 consecutive terms
As president.
as president.
Oh.
Yes.
Do you
But
think
if
he's
he
gonna...
starts off as vice president and something happens, he kind of
Don't say that.
Yeah.
Well,
I
wait.
know, got
That would be.
I mean, yeah.
That would be a
I don't
conspiracy.
know if he is not allowed to run again. That I don't know.
I feel like he's content with not running again, though. I feel like he's
That
like,
dude
That's
is.
he's like.
He is
He's like,
paid
I
and
need
chilling,
my
and he is the most. Yeah, he's
Yeah.
But
I don't.
told-
Why would he want that?
I
Did
told-
you see what? Look at day 1 of Obama and look at the end of
Yeah.
the 8 years. Dude's hair is just white. Like, I mean, he looked great. I mean, he looked like he handled it okay. But when you look at the guy's hair, you're like, oh no, this had an
You went
impact
through
on
it.
you, you know. So yeah, I don't know, but yeah, well, Clinton, like when Clinton was out of office, he was like, this sucks. If I could have run again, hell yeah, I would have run again. Like, I love this job. Like, he
So who
really
you think
loved the
Joe
job.
Biden might
but-
select?
What's
think-
that?
I said, who you think Joe Biden might select?
I don't know. I think he'll select a woman.
Yeah.
I think both Sanders and Biden would select a woman. And I don't know.
You
I
think
think
Hillary, you know what I'm trying to say.
Hillary.
Hillary, yeah. You think she
Hillary?
might?
No.
Are
I think she's done. I don't think any Democratic candidate wants
Her.
Hillary back.
Hillary back. No. And it's not, and I think most Democratic candidates would regard Hillary Clinton as more than competent, more than intelligent enough. She's got the experience. She'd be a phenomenal vice president, according to any of them. But I think she brings in so much history and baggage, whether that's deserved or undeserved. I'm not going to get into that, but it's too much. I see him picking someone like,
Elizabeth Warren.
maybe Warren. I see more likelihood of somebody like Kamala Harris, who's a senator from California and was a early presidential contender. Yes, or maybe even Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota.
Why?
I don't know. Why not?
She bothers me.
Well,
Vice
okay.
president.
For vice
I
president.
told, I
yeah.
told, I told everybody, if Obama was like, you know what, Joe, I'll be your vice president, he'll automatically do that. That's how I feel. Like, they would just dump
He would, yeah. Well, maybe, I don't know. Okay, here's my thing. Trump's base of support has held
Talked about him.
since, let's think of
We haven't even
this
talked
current
about
president.
it, yeah.
Has not moved. Has essentially not moved, no matter what has happened. No matter what he's done, whether it's been, oh, okay, nice work, President Trump, or, wow, you really effed this up, right? His numbers are essentially the same throughout. And did we talk about this? He made this joke one day. He's like, I could shoot somebody in the middle of Fifth Avenue and nobody would. And I think that's true. I really think that's true. And he was able, even though he got less of the popular vote, we talked about the Electoral College, right?
Yeah.
Even though he got 2 to 3 million less votes in the popular vote, his coalition seems to be pretty stable. So whoever the Democratic nominee is, they have to inspire a turnout that they have to win by the popular vote by at least 4 to 6 million votes, I think. Probably 4 million, I don't know. In the states that Hillary lost, and that was 2016, I don't know which states are going to be like that, but Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, was it Ohio or Pennsylvania? I forget the ones that Trump won.
Yeah.
But there were it was somewhere, sometimes it was 15,000 votes, sometimes it was 30,000 votes. It wasn't really that much, because people stayed home. It's all about churning out the base. It's about expanding your base. And that's what a lot of people are wondering, on the Democratic side, because the problem for Trump is that he doesn't seem able to expand his base, right? And that's hard. And look at the coronavirus.
But also he's not losing, so that makes
He's not losing. That's what I mean. But it's still tricky. It's still a tough slog. He's going to have to rely on the Electoral College in certain states to put him over the edge to victory. So even with the coronavirus and what's happening around that, this stock markets are lowest, biggest plunges in 20 years. People are really afraid of this. One second, I'm sorry. Across the board, most people who are following this and have an understanding of what is government's responsibility to deal with a potential pandemic, right, are not giving Trump very good grades. He's not doing very well on this. I don't think that's going to impact his numbers still. Do you know what I mean? It'll, for Democrats and people who already don't like Trump, it's just another thing on the list. But for people who support Trump, it's doesn't matter, right? He's doing the best he can, and he's, it's not his fault, and Democrats are trying to make this a political issue, and you know what I mean? I don't think that's the weird thing. I don't think the numbers are going to move, Clinton's numbers moved when the whole thing came out about he's having sexual relations in the Oval Office with this 22-year-old intern, right? When all that shit, you guys know about this?
Mm-hmm.
What? Clinton was impeached. Clinton was impeached by the House. It's okay if you don't know. I don't mean to be, Clinton was impeached by the House of Representatives, and it goes to the Senate, and the Senate did not vote. I don't know if they vote to have the trial and then voted to acquit. I don't even think they had the trial in the Senate. They were just we're not doing this. So he was impeached, but he wasn't removed from office. During that whole impeachment process, Clinton's numbers went up. Because a lot of people, probably a lot of men too, were you lied about having an affair. Gee, who's not going to lie about it? I swear, honey, I didn't do it. I never touched her. That's what you say.
Wow.
And there's his deposition, like for a grand jury, like he's on camera with his deposition. I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
Oh yeah, that sounds
Yeah,
familiar.
you know what I mean? And like, oh no, dude, you totally did. You totally did, and you know. And not just that, but then like I got friends in New York where like he opened an office in Harlem after he got out of after he left the presidency, and you know, like there would be meetings and photo opportunities, and I knew this woman who was at this thing, whatever, and she basically said like Clinton the whole time it was kind of crowded, and he's just like rubbing up against her, like totally like putting his back on her chest kind of thing, and just like whatever, and
Where at?
at some like photo op meeting or something. And afterwards he turns to her, he's like, thank you very much.
Ew.
Dirtbag piece of garbage, right? Maybe you like his policies, right? But as a person, as a human, and how you treat other people, yeah, he's a piece of garbage, you know.
But like also,
And this was
a
like
factor
this was
into his
like
presidency,
this was
too.
like 5-8 years after he's left office. Like he's still doing this shit.
Ew.
So, but yeah, but that was interesting. His numbers went up because a lot of people were like, "This is a personal thing. It's something that we don't respect. We don't like the fact that you did this in the White House, right? Maybe you could have found like a hotel somewhere. I don't know how easy it is for a president to go to like a Motel 6 and have a hookup, right? But you know what I'm saying? A lot of people are like, no, this is overseas. His numbers went through the roof. People in other countries were like, oh, you're a man, wonderful. You know what I mean? But a lot of people here thought that like it wasn't something that somebody should be impeached for, right?
No.
It's not like he misused the office. He did something that personally a lot of us find distasteful and immoral, but was it against the law? Was it, you know what I'm saying? What was against the law was that he lied under oath. No question about that. Everyone was in agreement. But for a lot of Americans, it was like, whether we like it or not, you can understand it, and you know what, this isn't something you should. So his numbers actually went up. Interesting thing here is like Trump's numbers are not moving. So I don't know. Whoever the Democrats nominate, if they can't turn out and inspire a lot of people to go beyond what Hillary Clinton got in 2016, I don't know. I think we got 4 more years with Trump. What were you going to say?
Okay, the whole Clinton thing that bothered me because we were talking about the quality of like leadership,
Mm-hmm.
and yes, his policies could have been great or whatever it was,
Yeah.
but you also want a leader to have all these qualities.
You
And
do.
This leader is being dishonest with his family member.
Yep. And
Not family
one of the
members,
things we want to
like-
keep in mind about that list of qualities that we had, right, is that so a lot of those qualities apply to Trump. Okay? So communicator. Is Trump a good communicator? Depends. It depends on where you're coming from, right?
He's
But
a communicator. I don't know if
for a lot of folks, like when Trump started campaigning and the stuff he was saying and how he was talking, they were like, yep, that's what I want to hear. Finally. You know what I mean? So it's all sort of in the eye of the beholder, I guess. But not every leader has those qualities, right? Not every leader has those qualities. The question is, given the time, given the moment that we're in, given our priorities, what are the qualities that are most important, and which are the ones that we can kind of do without right now, right? After 9/11, a leader being compassionate, right, was something that we wanted. But like with President Bush after 9/11, a lot of Americans, we wanted compassion for the families of the victims of that attack. We didn't want compassion when it came to dealing with the people responsible, right? Like, you know, Trump's like, the people who knock these buildings down are going to hear all of us soon. And most of the country is like, let's go, you know, you got people who are like, who did it? Who did it? You said Iraq? We're going. Great. We're there. You know, he could have said Mexico. And we would have been like, let's get it. You know, there would have been a wall of Americans at the border, like, ready to go. You know what I'm saying? He could have blamed anyone. And we would have been down, right? Like, we were pissed. We didn't want compassion. We wanted action. We wanted it's not the best human quality, but we wanted vengeance. You know what I'm saying? Like, and that's understandable given the time. You know, you can understand how human beings are. So those qualities of leadership, what we want and win from somebody is going to shift and vary depending on what's at stake, right? So okay, let's go back to like between 1960 and now, say, like, who is a leader in American history that a lot of us admire?
JFK.
JFK?
Yeah.
Who else?
Abraham Lincoln.
No,
Ronald
from
Reagan.
1960 onward. He's a little before it. What's that?
Ronald Reagan.
Okay, maybe Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Bill Clinton. Wait, is it Bill?
Obama.
It doesn't have to be a president.
Obama,
Oh.
we admire him.
We admired it. Obama.
Like leader.
I have a dream.
Martin Luther
MLK.
Yes.
I have a thing in my one of my icebreakers in my online class, like name somebody from history that you admire. It doesn't have to be someone that you personally relate to, but at least someone that you admire and someone that, you know, maybe in some way you want to emulate with your own life. And half the class picks Martin Luther King Jr., right?
Or Malcolm X.
Malcolm X is one. Okay, let's just take JFK and Martin Luther King Jr. Both of them screwed around.
Which
Martin
one?
Luther King Jr. cheated on his wife.
Don't tell me.
Yes! Yes, he did. JFK had a freaking like revolving door of like women and women. I shouldn't say that.
Take that back.
Going through the like that dude was like he would. I don't know what the modern language is for like screwing around, but he was having sex with all kinds of people, right? I mean, like, and the thing is, everybody knew. Like with JFK, like everybody knew, but it was this idea. It was like, well, we're all gentlemen, we're all men. We understand that this is what powerful men do. It's okay with us,
So
right?
you telling me that Martin Luther King,
Yes, cheated on his wife.
you have source.
Look it up. Google. Did Martin Luther King cheat on his wife? Yes.
I'm about to-
Now,
I think this
Now,
one
when
separates more.
when I think of Martin Luther King Jr., I'm thinking of the beloved community. I'm thinking of what kind of society we're trying to build. Like, what is a good and just society? Like, I'm thinking of all that. I'm thinking about, like, what does it mean to bring people together? What does it mean to, like, fight for justice? Like, that's the stuff I focus on. I don't think Martin Luther King Jr. think, oh, cheated on his wife, done with that dude. You know what I mean? It's like, it's part of a complex picture, and all of us, you know, some students like me. You want to go through my history and find out the shit that I've done and the shit that I've said to people? Like, I don't want that shit dug up. I'm not a perfect person.
Damn, his
You know?
man cheated on.
Yes,
That's terrible.
it is, but it is incredibly common. Like, this is just, it's really common.
You know what's crazy? I was talking to my coworker, and he was like, Diamond, you think it's okay for a man to have like to be with 52 women? I said, yeah, just like a woman can be with 52 men. He's like, no. I'm like, yeah. So what if Coretta King Scott, whatever, was
Coretta Scott King.
was a leader or something? She just cheated on Martin. She'll be ridiculed for that.
Of
But
course.
he can just be with
Yeah.
40 women. That's like,
Yeah.
Damn.
So everything.
And this is the thing, too. Like, Hillary Clinton, when the whole thing happened with Bill Clinton, you had this really interesting split where a lot of women loved her because, like, what did she do during that time? She stuck by him,
Damn.
right? She was like, this is my husband, this is whatever. Now, we don't know what's going on behind the scenes, right? We don't know what's happening behind the scenes. There's and I don't know if this is true, but there's a thing where it's Trump's inauguration, and Bill Clinton, she and Bill Clinton are sitting there, and he apparently is looking at Melania Trump with this, like, and Hillary is like looking at him and then looks at who he's looking at and is like, oh God. Like, this look on her face is just like, here we go again. This motherfucker can't. Like, I don't know how, I wasn't there. I don't know like if this is just selectively edited video, but it looks bad. But it's like, for a lot of women, it was like, yeah, cool, stuck by your man, that's what you do. And there were other women who were like, why didn't you dump that piece of shit? Like, I don't have any respect for you. Like, you know what I'm saying? So there was a real...
This is hard.
It is hard. No, it is hard because in week 3, we were talking about core values and political culture, right? and we talked about male supremacy, patriarchy.
Way to tie it in.
That always. That shit is so complex and so tricky and so okay. If you are a woman in Puerto Rico, right, and you have curly, quote, nappy hair, okay, what is called black hair. And if you ask Puerto Ricans, by the way, they're like, well, we don't really have any racism here. It's not, we don't think in those terms. When they go to the salon, you know what they say? Please take the race out
What?
of their hair. Straighten their hair to take the race out.
So how are you about to sit there?
So
and-
my point is, like, you have this, women in a patriarchal society will absorb, will take on, and believe certain aspects or certain things that help strengthen patriarchal culture. It's not a simple thing like, oh, we've got a patriarchy and all women are opposed to it and all men are in support of it, right? There's all kinds of aspects of this that, like, and you see this with white supremacy too. Like, there are people of color who take on certain aspects or certain beliefs, certain principles, certain values that are essential to white supremacy, and yet they're people of color. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's hard to get this shit off of you. You know what I mean? It's hard to get this stuff off of you. So, I mean, feminists will talk about this a lot. Like, our problem is not men. Our problem is the women who have so taken on, like, aspects of patriarchy that we're never going to reach them, and they look at us thinking, like, the hell are you doing? Stop messing around. Like, you got a good husband, they're supporting you, they're providing for you. Like, you were able to go to college, what the hell's what's the matter with you? Why are you fighting for, you're messing it up for the rest of us, right? That happens. I mean, these things are very tricky, and a lot of the ways it's talked about, it makes it look like, oh, here's the good side and here's the bad side. And it's like, no, we're all dirty. Some of us are dirtier than others. Some of us are like, and the thing is too, like, we all have to survive in this society, right? So a patriarchy, a male supremacist culture is one where the expectations of women are this and the expectations of men are this. To get ahead in that culture, women are going to exploit, because it's all tricky. Some of it's porous, right? Like, so you may be a woman who's like, I'm smart, I'm motivated, I'm intelligent, and brilliant, and this society wants me here. Where are the places where I can, you hear like people criticize women, oh, she slept her way to the top, right? Maybe she did. But she did what she had to do in this society to get where she was. We might not like it. We look at it and we think, oh, that's terrible. That's not what you're supposed to do. But it's like,
Did you give her
you
a chance
put
to
me
do
in,
that?
yeah, did you give me a level playing field to compete and I chose to sleep my way to the top? No, you didn't give me a level playing field. You gave me shit and I tried to make a sandwich with it. You know what I mean? Like, it's not that you like it, but you also, I have friends who, if they're, who are African American, if they're in a meeting with white folks, they understand, like, they have to be bilingual, right? We talk about, like, speaking different languages. A lot of folks I know understand, like, if I'm in this room with white people, I know I have to speak this way and I have to act this way and I have to think about what their values are and what they care about. I can't be myself. I have to adjust and be what they need me to be. And that's, like, really hard to do. Like, I don't do that. Anywhere I'm in, I can just be me, right? Because I don't have to. But it's different. Do you get what I'm saying? So, like, how you take on and how you try to navigate this shit is really difficult. And so when you look at something like cheating, I don't like it either. But I understand that King was a human being. King was not superhuman. King wasn't whoever you want to think, right? Like,
He wasn't what the media portrayed him. Like, they never talked about this in, like, third grade. They never talked about this.
well, but you also didn't hear about, what I learned of King in school was, like, he gave this speech I have a dream, and that was it. Like, to me, that was the only speech the dude gave. And then I read like his 1967 speech at Riverside about the Vietnam War. I read the stuff that he talked about on the eve of his assassination. He was in Tennessee, was it Tennessee or Kentucky, working with and helping organize, well, they were already organized, he was there in support, striking sanitation workers, right? Like, I didn't know anything about that. I didn't hear, there's so much about King's life I didn't hear. There's so much about everybody's life that we don't hear,
So
you know?
I feel like,
So there's a lot, people are complex and dynamic, and there are things that are troubling, and there are things that are beautiful, and, you know.
I
Yeah.
feel like Malcolm X is better because I feel like he didn't change. Because
No. Well, what about this? Malcolm also came with an ideology and a mindset, though, that was very patriarchal.
Yeah.
Nation of Islam, like his background in terms of what women were supposed to be and the role that women were supposed to have, like
Yeah.
Malcolm was not, like, he had problematic ideas. There's shit that he thought and did and that were, now he didn't cheat, from what I know. Loved his wife. So Ronald Reagan, right? I was a punk rocker, so by law I had to hate Reagan. But by all accounts, Reagan loved his wife. There are like love letters between them that were published, and you read them and just like, oh my God, it's wonderful. Obama. I don't think there's any question that Obama loved his wife. There's a picture of Barack and Michelle. I'm on a first name basis with them. Barack Obama and his wife standing there, and like he's got his arms around her, and it looks like they were posing, like that it was part of they were like posing for a picture, but that they also caught this sort of candid moment where he's kind of like whispering in her ear with his eyes closed, and she's like just leaning in with this smile of like, oh, I'm so into you. And it's like, you can't fake that shit. Like, and I really, I think that it does. But that was the thing, you look at it and then you're like, well, what about this? Or what about his support for the coup in Honduras? Or whatever you want to like get into where you didn't, policy things, like that stuff means something to people. You know what I mean? Like you never know like the leadership qualities that we care about are going to vary depending on the time. They're also going to vary depending on the person. They're going to vary depending on the person. So, yeah, it's don't feel. I would urge you to. I think we need to have an understanding of who folks were, right? Thomas Jefferson. I've got a recorder right here in front of me, so I'm like recognizing what I'm going to say. Thomas Jefferson was a rapist.
Yeah, and George Washington.
Yes. He was a slave owner, and people talk about his relationship with one of his slaves, Sally Hemings. And historians are like combing through all of this stuff to say like, well, yeah, but like it looks like he really did care for her and this and so on. It's like, I don't give a shit. I don't care if he got her a Valentine's Day card every semester. Had kids with her. Didn't free the kids, right? Like his own children, didn't free them. And that power dynamic, he owned her. It was absolutely impossible for there to be a consensual sexual relationship with her given that power dynamic. It's impossible. Like you just can't, if you own someone and you've got them locked up in your garage and you're having sex with them, I don't give a shit what they say to you. That's not a consensual relationship. You know what I mean? Now, what does Jefferson mean for us in terms of our understanding of things like equality and justice and democratic governance and popular sovereignty and all of this stuff? Like he's a giant in our history. You've got Martin Luther King Jr. quoting Jefferson, in part because King knows you got to speak that language to appeal to white folks, because white folks love Jefferson. We love the Founding Fathers, right? The Founding Fathers. So King is like, yeah, Jefferson said blah, 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 blah. King wasn't out there going, he was a rapist for slave owning, which was the truth. King instead said, I'm going to look at this, and I'm going to uplift this, because this speaks to what I want to see happen in our society. And you know what I'm saying?
But that sucks. That sucks that someone can
does.
say something and like totally be doing something else.
It does. Yeah, it does.
You know what you
Now, I don't know that King is on record. That would be an interesting thing. If King is on record saying, like, don't ever cheat on your wife. Right? I mean, he's on record talking about honesty and morality and all of this stuff. But as a good minister, I'm sure he's also on record about the complexity of human behavior and that people are flawed, right? And that people will sin and people, and the problem and the issue is like, how do you keep going? How do you get better? How do you do better, right? When you look at King's entire body of work, or when you look at Jefferson's entire body of work, where do you put this stuff, right? The fact that Jefferson was a slave owner, I think about that, right? So his writing is about equality and freedom and so on. I'm looking at in the context of you owned people, mother effer, right?
Yeah.
I'm also looking at in the context of like, at this time in history, of course you owned people. You know what I mean? Like, what is normal at a given time and what is acceptable at a given time, whether I like it or not now, is also something that you just, to be intellectually honest, you have to give it some consideration. It doesn't mean that we look and say, oh, it's fine, everybody, but it's more that you have an understanding, right? So I look at King cheating on his wife, and it's like, yeah, that sucks. But it doesn't take everything King did and put it in the toilet for me. Just like whatever Jefferson did here, it doesn't take the entirety of Jefferson's life and it doesn't go on the trash heap. Do you know what I'm saying? Everybody does what they do in the context of when they live, and they make good decisions and they make bad decisions, and we got to take the whole thing and consider the whole thing.
Oh my bad, go ahead.
I feel like we have two things. Okay, when you said it's a patriotic society, I feel like we still
Patriarchal.
Yeah, patriarchal.
Yeah.
Society. I feel like it's forever because it's forever because look, if you think about it now, like
It's hard to clean that up. Yeah.
Hillary Clinton ran for president. She didn't win because she was a man. I strongly feel that she didn't win because she was a man.
I think that was
like,
part of it. I don't know if that was the whole thing, but I think that was part of it.
If women was slave owners and they was doing all of this, like they would be so like.
Well, let's take the Democratic field right now. You've got someone like Joe Biden who gets up and says, the Declaration of Independence says all people are created equal, endowed by and he screws it up. Dude's been a senator since he was like 29. How do you screw up the Declaration of Independence? Like, you know this, like a Catholic knows the rosary. I mean, it's like you, and then he finishes by saying, you know the thing. And I'm like, that should be your campaign slogan. Biden, you all know the thing. You know what I mean? Like, and he's forgetful, and he's like, got this history of like, meeting women and like touching them in weird, and it's like, there's all this weird shit. You got Bernie Sanders, who cannot keep his hair together. And is like, there's actually a lot of, if you actually watch Bernie Sanders stuff, like he has a lot of moments where he's very calm and soft-spoken,
Yeah.
But the image of Sanders is like, here's this dude with messy hair, frumpy, who shouts at you. What if Elizabeth Warren's hair was her version of Bernie Sanders?
She will be destroyed.
What if Elizabeth
Sure,
Warren
maybe.
tried to quote the Declaration of Independence and screwed it up and had a history of like rubbing men on their asses?
Oh man, she would be destroyed.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Even if she
Like-
came out there and like did all, like not did that, but like in her,
Yeah,
if she did that,
right.
they'd be like, oh,
People would be, we'd never hear the end of it,
That's why I'm slapping all men on their asses.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's with patriarchy, there's behavior that is allowed. There are certain things that are acceptable when men do it and unacceptable when women do it. To this day, if you're running for office and you have children under 18, advisors are going to tell you, don't run. We've talked about this, right? Like, if you've got small children and you're a woman, the question is going to be, who's minding the kids? If it had been Michelle Obama running for president with, I forget what their children, the two daughters that they had,
Sasha and Malia.
Sasha and Malia, right?
damn.
If they were if it had been Michelle Obama running, everybody would have been like, excuse me, who's taking care of the kids? Barack? Your husband? And now it's like, well, this is now a suspect marriage. Because what is the husband doing taking care of the kids? What kind of weird people are you? The husband doesn't take care of the kids. You know what I mean? Like, that's not how it's supposed. So all of these expectations are there even today, right? And I think for a lot of people, we're able to move past that, and we don't necessarily care, but a lot of people do. Like, it's hard to shake this stuff. It doesn't happen overnight, and I think the less attention we pay to it, the less likely it is to change. You know, go ahead.
I just wanted to tie a point because it just like clicked for me because you were talking from the very beginning. You were talking about how Donald said, "Oh, I can kill someone and my numbers won't."
Well, he
drop.
said
And,
shoot someone.
Whatever,
He didn't say-
whatever it is.
Yeah.
Sounds like Joe Biden.
That makes sense because MLK, like, even though he cheated on his wife, for you, that will never be something to take whatever he did that was good and flush it down the toilet.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
I feel like that's when people like Trump supporters are like, you know what?
Absolutely.
Whatever you do,
Mhm.
like even if you do shoot someone, it's really not going to take away from all the good that you've
Right.
done and put it down the toilet for us. And I feel like that's why his numbers are not moving.
Well, and there's another component to it that's different now. And that is that I remember there's a guy named Justin Amash who is a representative from Michigan, Republican. There was a movement in the earlier 2000s or 2010 that was called the Tea Party, right? And the Tea Party movement among conservatives was this sort of ideological movement that more conservative, a little more on the libertarian side on some issues. And you had a lot of Republicans who were elected and supported based on this. And Amash was one of those people. Like, he was considered sort of like this hardcore, super reliable conservative Republican. He winds up splitting and comes out in support of Trump's impeachment.
Oh.
Okay? Like, he was basically the only one. Mitt Romney, in the former presidential candidate, senator from Utah, also voted in favor of Trump's impeachment. I don't even know if Amash was in the House after that, but Amash left the Republican Party. He became an independent. And there was a town hall that Justin Amash hosted within the past year or two or something. And they were talking to this woman afterwards who had attended it. And she was like she was in support of Trump. And when she left, she said, you know what, I'm confused. Because he said a lot of things about what has happened that I had never heard before. And someone said, like, well, where do you get your news from? And like, her news and information were from media sources that were essentially like, we're in favor of not just Republican. No, that's also complex, right? It's not like Republicans are all this, you know. You've got a lot of critics of Trump who are conservative or who are Republican, right? But for her, like, her media sources, where she was getting her information from, nobody was talking about this stuff. They were all saying, like, it's a witch hunt. They're all out to get Trump. They're pissed that Hillary lost. That's what this is about. None of this means anything. This is all about a political witch hunt because they don't like Trump. They're pissed that Hillary lost. That's what it's about. And so she goes and hears this guy speak, and she's like, I don't know what to think, because now I don't. So there's that issue, right? Where we're getting our information from. I worry about this with my Facebook feed, right? Because I look at my Facebook feed and I see what people are posting. I'm like, wow, I'm in a bubble. Like, I have to really work to find different sources of information and different perspectives, because Facebook has said, oh, these are the things you like, this is the kind of stuff you're interested in, this is what we're going to show you. And it's like, okay, that's cool, but now I'm getting this kind of like warped view of what's actually happening, and I got to work to find, you know. So there's that. There's also, and I don't know how to say this, we're now, facts and truth are becoming politicized in a way where it almost doesn't matter what happened or what the facts are. Like, okay, you think this, or you support this candidate. here's a list of facts, or here's a couple of facts that should make you reconsider that, a lot of us, and this is happening across the board, but a lot of us are saying, I don't care, or I don't believe that. Like, in fact, if you say to somebody, oh, are you a Bernie Sanders supporter? Yes, I am. Did you know that Sanders did this, this, and this?
They're like, I don't care.
It's not that. Now, being presented with facts that challenge your perspective now is making a lot of people even more deeply committed. Like, the more I hear, if I'm a Trump supporter, the more that I hear that Trump is this, or he did this, or he did this, I'm like, nope. Like, I'm even more firmly for Trump. The more shit that you the more stuff that you tell me that is anti-Trump, the more supportive of Trump I get. That's kind of new. And that, for someone like me, like, who believes in, like, or came up believing in, like, a liberal education, and by liberal I don't mean liberal like political, I mean liberal in the sense of like evidence, science, you study, you research, you look at what the data shows, and then you make your conclusions based on that. I don't know what the hell to do. You know? Like the idea, and I understand that, like, again, things are complex, but to me there's like some data and there's some evidence that is just like, this is the absolute best evidence we have, and the data shows this, or look at the frickin' tape. Like, this is on TV, the man said this, right? It doesn't matter. And that's tricky, because now this whole system that we have of like why we make the decisions that we make and the assumptions that we had about why people do what they do is now turned on its head, right? Like, I came up thinking, when you get evidence that contradicts what you, for example, college classrooms, the size of college classrooms, or, you know, they're supposed to be small, right? As a teacher, it's like, you need small class sizes, you need small class sizes. And then I see these studies that are like, here's a dude who had 100 people in a class or 200 people in a class, and their classes did better, the students did better because they changed their teaching, right? They changed how they taught the class. It didn't have anything to do with the size of the class, it had to do what you were doing as a teacher. And now I'm like, when I hear people say smaller class sizes, I'm like, so nobody here likes me because of that. But you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm like, I don't know. The evidence doesn't suggest that. Maybe for kindergarten, yeah, I don't know if you want 200 kids in a kindergarten class with one teacher. That's probably not manageable. But at a certain level, actually the size of the class doesn't matter. What matters is how you organize the class. So I saw this information. I'm like, okay, I now think differently about this. But a lot of folks don't. A lot of folks don't. And I don't know what to do with that. It's like I'm struggling with it, you know. It's hard.
You know what's crazy? I think, you know that they actually found the cure for the coronavirus? I seen that on one thing.
Yeah, vitamin C.
Yeah, you know.
No, I mean, it's like there are things, I mean, with flu, with colds, with anything like this, there's stuff that you can do to, yeah. The coronavirus is not like the plague or some, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's stuff that we can do that will, you know, yeah, should you not touch your face? Try not to touch your face. Wash your hands, you know.
They found it in 3 hours. But I was watching news that says, they used like $8.3 billion just to fund a cure for it.
You mean a vaccine?
Yeah.
Right.
But it took 3 hours to find a vaccine cure for it.
No, it didn't. I'm gonna push back on that, because how do we know the cure works?
You test it out.
How long does that take?
I don't know. As long as it takes for it to go away.
What is going on? We are now about 2 months, maybe 4 or 5 weeks away from having a vaccine developed to address the coronavirus. Does anybody know anything about vaccines and how this works? Like, you then need to test it. You then need time to look at who you've given it to and study and see how, like, 1, is the vaccine effective? 2, is it safe? We're not going to have an effective tested vaccine for probably 1.5 years, right?
What?
Yeah. because that's just how long it takes. Somebody comes up with a vaccine, you can't be like, oh, based on what you're supposed to do and how you develop them, this is what we did. Everybody, here's your vaccine. It's like, well, was this tested? Did you monitor the people who gave it? Like, how many people did you test?
What if they die
Over how,
after?
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? Yeah, there was like, there was a thing with the polio vaccine where like one of the initial versions of the polio vaccine, like a ton of people like got polio and died from the vaccine. Like it was like, oop, shit, we got to go back and do this again, And so there's like, yeah, it's a process. It takes a while to do. So I don't know. But what was your point about the coronavirus?
So
About the
you tell
coronavirus?
I mean, when I heard that, because it was on, I
Mhm.
think that on World Star. So when I heard it, I was like, damn, it took 3 hours to find the vaccine, but people making it, they dragging it, but now that you point out it's going to take a year. So
Right.
you told me the coronavirus is going to be on the planet for a whole year.
Well, viruses mutate. Viruses die out. You know what I'm saying? We're not, those of us who get the flu, we're not getting the same flu that we got 5 years ago. Flus evolve. Flus are different. Like they keep trying to, like the flu vaccine, when you go to get a flu shot, you're getting a shot for the flu that they had 10 years ago. You know what I mean?
Right.
Now, flus are similar enough to where it's like, okay, you're still getting some protection, and maybe that's a good argument for still getting the flu shot. I'm not, by the way, trying to like say to someone that they shouldn't get a flu shot, but my point is just more like the way this works or the way the science works is trickier than that, So whether we have a vaccine for coronavirus or not, this could also die out. I mean, one of the reasons that SARS, right, which came up a few years ago, that died out was because you had really effective government policies around containment, quarantines, right? And it didn't spread. Do you know what I mean? So that's what you do. You do the same stuff that you do when you got the flu. Way more people are going to die this year from the flu than for coronavirus, right? So that's something to consider also, based on the numbers.
The flu.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, flu can be deadly.
What is it about the damn flu?
It kicks your ass. It's like, and it also depends on like what's the immune system of the person who gets it. What's your overall health in general? Like somebody like, I don't know, who here is healthy, right? If you get the flu and someone else gets the flu, like it's the same flu, but it's a different body with a different experience and a different immune system. And like for this person, the flu just might be the thing that kicks it over to a fatality, whereas for you, it's like, yeah, it was a rough week, I had the flu. I'm back. You know what I mean? Like, so it depends. I hope there's not like a biochemist somewhere who's listening to me going, dude, you don't know what you're talking about. Stick to Congress. This isn't, yeah. But yeah, so anyway. Whew! So all that will be on the final.
It's going to be a rough year because I was supposed to go to Italy this summer, but
Dude, don't.
they shut the whole damn city down, country.
Yeah.
They closed everything. Like everything's on lockdown. I was supposed to go to Miami for spring break. They motherfucker.
There was a really interesting call. I was reading a blog that looked at Biden
They're
and
gonna give you your money back.
Yeah, they gave my damn money back.
I looked at an article about Biden and Sanders, right? Like Sanders was just in Michigan, had a massive rally down by, or was he in Cobo? Then he had a huge rally up in Flint, and then Biden was here, and folks are like, stop having rallies. You need to stop having rallies.
Why?
Like, let's not put a shit ton of people cooped up into the same, like, close, all pressed up against each other, holding up their Biden signs or whatever. Like, get off of me. Like, I don't know where you've been. Did you wash? Like, where's the sanitizer? You know what I mean?
Did you wash?
No, but this is one of the reasons. I mean, people have talked about this with like the flu pandemic back in the early 20th century. That why did it spread so much? Because people were scared and packed churches to pray in hopes that they wouldn't get the flu, and it wound up being like this perfect incubator for spreading the disease.
Oh man.
Do you know what I'm saying? Like, that's, we got a kid. I like to take my kid to play, like playscapes and like indoor whatever, especially when it's raining or when and we're like, I don't know if I wanted to bring my kid here. you know, so it's tricky.
Concerts. I have
Yeah,
7 tickets to
concerts.
go to 7 different concerts this summer, and
I don't think it's.
This is why I don't do anything.
If they
I
talking about,
just lay in bed all day.
Okay. We need to move and shift over to talking about the chapter, which is not going to be very long, because we're going to do kind of like general things. I want to pull up our.
Should I get my money back? Should I start selling the concert tickets?
I mean,
What concert?
I'm going to Russ.
There's a-
And I'm going to Foo Fighters. And I'm going to
There's like a county in California that completely like made it
think the virus
illegal
will
for
die.
people to like
I'll say-
gather in groups like over 1,000.
Yeah.
I
I'll say
hope,
by
I
next
hope,
month.
I hope like the virus will die in summer. No sun.
hell no.
Hell no.
If they don't, if the shit don't get better by April, I'll sell them tickets.
Oh, no.
No.
Y'all sell.
This is a it's a tricky. People get scared. I get it.
If they go to Michigan, I'm staying in the house.
What's that?
If they come to Michigan, I'm staying in the house. People not staying.
I work with kids. I work with snotty kids.
Oh, dirty little. Ugh, my
Yep,
goodness.
Yep.
You got your whole hand in your mouth. What the is wrong with you? Like.
And like I have a kiddo that I work with that licks his hands,
Yeah.
and he picks up anything from the floor and eats it, and I'm like, oh.
Did you all see that meme going around? Or it's not a meme. It's like a quick. I don't know. It's a governor or somebody who's like giving this speech about
Oh, yeah,
like,
and
of
she
course,
like,
and then
and then she touches her mouth.
and you're like, oh. But that's the thing. Like, there's a. You know what I mean? I just like took my hands and rubbed my
I've been touching
lips.
her
It's
face
just
the
like
entire time.
God. You know, it's hard to do this. Yeah. Anyway. Whew.
She was like, let's try and work on not touching our eyes, nose,
Mhm.
and mouth. And then she went and
Yeah.
like licked her finger to move to the next
Yeah.
page.
Yeah.
People still traveling. Me, I ain't go traveling. I can't take that risk.
I think I said this the previous week or a couple classes ago. Like I think if we just do like common sense stuff, we're probably good. You know. So, but yeah, travel is a tricky thing. You've also got Senator Ted Cruz from Texas was at a conference called CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Committee Conference, and he shook hands with somebody who had tested positive for it after the thing, and now he's self-quarantined. There's a member of Congress from somewhere who's
Didn't someone shake Trump's hand?
yeah, there's like all these questions, and I don't know what that means. You know what I mean? Have you ever? You can shake hands with someone who's got the flu and not get the flu.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like, so it's not like,
Okay, but
like, oh man, you looked at me and now I've got it. You know what I mean? There isn't a, you know.
I just feel like the thing about coronavirus, you don't. They say it takes up to 5 days to show.
Longer than that sometimes. That's the tricky thing. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's you don't know.
Everything's tricky. I'm just gonna go home and not leave.
That's the best safe place.
That's a.
Hey, it's a good excuse. I mean, if you tell your employer or a teacher that you're sick, they can't force you to come.
Yeah. Well, it was an odd thing. I got a message from the administration that said, like, given this thing with the coronavirus and concerns about health, that, to please report, if somebody has that, like, if I learn from, you, like, you feel like you're coming down with this and you're going to get tested for the coronavirus, like, that I'm supposed to let people know about it. And it also says, like, if any students have to be out because of this, we hope that you will be flexible with them about being able to get their work in. And I'm like,
Nobody's about to be doing work.
no, that's not the point. My point was, like, well, maybe you've got the coronavirus and it's like, oh, I can still read and I can still do stuff, right? I mean,
My eyes are just like burned.
yeah, well, I don't know. But my point was, I'm like, who isn't being flexible with students when they're sick?
Oh, they're not.
Like,
Believe me,
that
there's people out
pissed
there.
me off. I was like,
There
wait
are
a minute.
people
Like,
out there
if
who-
you're out sick with whatever and you're like, hey, can I turn in my quiz? I'm like, no, Jack, sorry. No, I just spit. Excuse me. No,
Here who
that's
have done that,
scary.
though.
You know what I'm saying? Well, I don't know. I don't get that. People get sick. Anyway, again, it's school, right?
Yeah, it's
If I'm sick and I miss shifts at work, okay, someone's going to get that promotion instead of me, or someone's going to get that account, or somebody's get, whatever. You know what I mean? I get that, but with school, it's like, come on, man. Anyway, let's review. How many branches of government?
12.
I'd like you to leave. How many branches?
3.
3. What does Congress do?
They impeach people.
No, well, they try
It's
to.
fun.
They pass laws. Like,
They're in charge of funding. They pass laws. Okay, so legislation,
They do.
and so lawmaking, legislation. They're also supposed to represent the interests of the people that send them there. But generally,
Yeah, there we go.
it's, okay, we need to have laws. Who's going to make the laws? Congress. What does the judiciary do?
it's like the judge system. They decide the laws.
They don't design the laws.
Well, decide the
They
laws.
enforce
They
it.
decide, not enforce it.
But they
Speak on it. They act.
they speak on it.
They
act
do
on
it.
Yeah.
They adjudicate, or they say,
You were
okay,
looking for
because
it.
when you have, that good,
That's a big
good
word.
point. My point is there a conflict over the law, right? The police say that I broke the law, and I say, no, I didn't, right? People versus Matthew Cross, that's the name of my debut hip-hop album. And I go to court, and I say, no, this didn't happen, blah, 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 blah. Actually, I don't have to say anything, right?
That's right.
Like the judge or the jury is then in a situation to adjudicate or to determine, is this person guilty or not guilty, right? We have laws, you can't break the law, but you also can't have a system where the government can just say, you broke the law,
That's it.
and that's it, right? You have to prove that, okay? So that's where the judiciary comes in. So what's the president supposed to do? What's the executive branch?
He's just supposed to enforce all those laws, right?
Okay, who enforces the law? Who enforces federal law? The president.
President.
And not, Trump isn't there like breaking into somebody's home to to arrest them, right? I mean, you have the Drug Enforcement Agency to enforce and investigate violations of drug laws. You have ATF, you've got the, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. You've got the FBI. You have all of these organizations, organizations that are under the executive branch whose job it is to enforce the law. And when they find that somebody has violated the law, then the government might bring a case against them in court, right? So for the presidency, your job is essentially the enforcement and the administration of laws. So if the law says that people above a certain age are supposed to receive Social Security benefits because of the Social Security Act passed back in 1930 whatever, that's an executive branch, a presidential branch body or organization that is charged with, okay, who's getting Social Security checks? What do they get? Let's mail the check out every month, right? Like, that's all done under the executive branch. Congress passed the law, but it's up to the president to administer that. Does that make sense? Okay. You also have, so does the president have any leeway in determining how they're going to enforce the law or how it's going to be administered or what they're going to do? Yes, right? So the law is the law, right? You might have, for example, civil rights laws that prohibit discrimination based on race, sex, religion, and so on. You might have a president that comes in and says, okay, but I'm personally concerned about anti-Christian bias, and so I'm going to look at civil rights enforcement specifically through this lens of, are people who are Christian being persecuted or discriminated against based on their views, right? Well, discrimination is more than that, but now that president can take those agencies that are tasked with enforcing and administering the law and say, I don't want you to focus on gender or sex. That's all still against the law, but we're going to direct our resources toward this, right? The president can do that, okay? So the president can also say to the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, this particular compound or chemical that's maybe in fertilizer, that we know that leads to pollution, or that does this, or that's harmful to human health. And the previous administration put that on the list of chemicals that we are going to regulate or try to get rid of. We're getting rid of that. You can still use that chemical, right? So because Congress doesn't say this chemical is now illegal, it's up to the EPA to make that determination. Congress gives the EPA the power to do that. Well, the EPA is under the executive branch. So if the president says, well, we want to go in this direction, now the focus of the EPA can shift. Does this make sense? Okay. So it can get confusing when somebody's running for president and you think, oh, we're going to do this and this and this and this and this. It's like, well, you're the president, you're not the king. Like Congress does that. And that's true. On the other hand, the president still has a lot of, we're seeing this now with Trump. President Obama had created, I don't know under what agency this was, but he'd created a task force to deal specifically with preparation for pandemics, like we have with the coronavirus. President Trump got rid of that, right? And in his defense, Trump said, well, look, I come from a business background, and if you've got a bunch of people in a business whose job it is to look out for something that may or may not happen, and nothing is happening, after a while, you say, we don't need this anymore, right? And Trump's like, if I need these folks, I can just hire them back, you know what I mean? Well, and it's not that simple, but that was Trump's perspective. Like, okay, well, we don't need this anymore, okay? But a lot of folks are looking at that and saying, wow, it'd be really nice to have a task force that understands how this stuff works and can help us mobilize, right? So the president has a lot of, and that's a tricky thing, because from Trump's perspective, you can look at the history and say, okay, I guess that might have been, you can see the argument behind that. That was pre-coronavirus. But now that the coronavirus happened, everyone's looking at Trump and going like, you asshole, you. It's like, well, okay, but you know, it's easy to be sort of like, what do you call that when it's like after the game and you're like screaming at the quarterback and it's like, man, you know, maybe that's the wrong metaphor or analogy or whatever. But do you get what I'm saying? Like, you can understand from Trump's perspective why they did that. But now you've got the coronavirus, so it looks like a really stupid move. Well, anything looks like a stupid move. Do you get what I'm saying? So, okay. But the president has the ability to do this.
Can we talk about some stuff on this?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so number 16, why does the divided government occur?
Yes. We have divided government right now. Okay. So divided government refers to political parties. There has been, when did we last have, I guess what could be called a unified government? Was I think the first 2 years of the Obama administration. Obama was a Democrat. The House of Representatives was controlled by Democrats, and the Senate, very narrowly, was also controlled by Democrats. Okay, and if you look at that 2 years, this is the thing. Like, if you're trying to think like, am I a Democrat? Am I a Republican? Who should I be voting for? What do I want? A good thing to do, and you're all like, yeah, I'm totally not going to do this, dude. Whatever. a good thing to do. What's that?
Is there like an online quiz?
I don't know if that, no, you've actually got to do some work for this, but you could look and say, okay, here's a time when the Republicans controlled all branches of government, leaving out the judiciary, right? But like, they controlled the presidency, they controlled the House, they controlled the Senate. What did they do? When they were like, oh shit, I'm a Republican president, I want this. The House is controlled by Republicans, we're simpatico, we get it. The Senate is not going to screw it up because they're also controlled by Republicans. We can get some shit done. Like, that's an exciting thing for a party that's in power. If you look at the presidency of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, you can't look at that presidency without also understanding that he had a very sympathetic House and Senate for the most part, right? So, those first 2 years of the Obama administration, what kind of legislation was passed? Right? What did they do? How successful were they in getting things passed? Look at those 2 or 4 years when Bush had a unified Republican majority in the Congress. What did they do? You don't have to look right now. I'm just saying it's a good test, right? Like, what do the parties stand for? Well, when they have all the power, look at what they do. Look at the kind of laws they pass. So divided government occurs when one branch of government, or when two different branches of government are controlled by a different party. So right now we have the Senate controlled by Republicans, the presidency controlled by a Republican, Donald Trump, and the House is controlled by Democrats. Okay, so we now have divided government.
Two different parties control.
Two different parties controlling different branches of government. Okay. Who determines the role of the vice president?
The president.
President. When President Obama chose Biden, you know, things are changing. Like, it used to sort of, President Johnson was vice president under John F. Kennedy, right? John F. Kennedy gets killed because Johnson wanted him dead. So,
You think so?
I don't know. I don't think so. It's just, I always love throwing like things like that in there, you know. Anyway, that was one of the theories around it, right? Anyway, Johnson hated it because he came from the Senate where he ran the place for years, had so much power. Now he's vice president under Kennedy, and they all look at him like, you're some Texas hick. F you. We're all these like educated East Coast liberals, and we're gonna blah, blah, blah. And they just thought Johnson was a hack. You know, like, whatever, we needed you for Texas, right? And I don't even know if they got Texas, but you know what I'm saying? So Johnson was relegated to this, like, he didn't have really any political power. But that depends, right? Depends on the personalities. It depends on, you know. So Obama, when he chooses Biden, Biden says to him, I'm going to be loyal. What you say as president goes, but I'm telling you, every decision you make, I'm the last person in the room with you, right? The last voice you're going to hear on whatever you decide to do is going to be mine. Obama's like, that's what I want. It's like, oh, okay, cool. You know, respected his history, respected his perspective, respected the fact that he had all these connections, all this institutional knowledge as a senator for so many years. So who determines the role of the vice president? The president does.
What about number 7? What was the purpose of the 1973 War Powers Act?
Okay, that's a fun one. Who declares war in our system?
President.
Nope,
Congress.
Congress. That's in the Constitution. How many declarations of war have we had in our history? How many times have we gone to war?
A lot, but we've only had, I think...
We've gone to war like, is it 200 times?
What?
Going to war meaning how many times have we sent troops overseas or to another country or territory in a military
But that was all
capacity?
because of allies, though, wasn't it?
Ask Haiti or Nicaragua or Guatemala or Iran or... No, it's not always because of allies. No, but it's a sketchy history, right? No, I mean, there's and this is the thing, the history is complex, but, you know. So the Congress's job is to declare war. We have gone to war probably over 200 times in our history. How many times has Congress declared war?
Not a lot, I'm
I
guessing.
think
Five.
five
Okay.
times? Oh, I
Right.
thought it was one.
The War of 1812,
But, yeah.
World War I. 1812 was an easy one. The British invaded. Like, it's hard not to be like, oh, I don't know. Like, dude, they're burning down, like, the Capitol. Like, could we please declare war?
Yeah,
So the War of 1812, World War I, War of 1812, Spanish-American War, where we liberated Cuba from the Spanish, as well as from the Cubans. The World War I, World War II, and fifth one, Korean War? I think Korea. I don't know if Vietnam was even a declaration of war. I don't know if we had a declaration of war in
The
Vietnam. I
one
don't
that
think so.
was like, we did on Japan, didn't we? Or that was like...
That was World War II, yeah. So, right. But it was essentially like we're declaring war on Japan, but also all of those who are allied with Japan, and in that case, that count it as, with the Germans too and the Italians.
So what was the purpose of the course at the Declaration?
Okay, so the purpose, this is the problem with some of this stuff, is you got to give some historical context. The purpose of the War Powers Act. What's happening in 1973? Is anyone here taking a history class? Are we at war in 1973?
No, but we're like,
We are at war.
Yes, we are.
When we are.
sure.
The longest war, well, Afghanistan is now the longest war. Vietnam. So Vietnam War is still going. It is learned in the early 1970s that the president, and not just Nixon, but also Johnson, and there was actually just a report that came out, a bunch of declassified documents that showed this also about Afghanistan, that the presidency under both parties, Democrat and Republican, had lied to the American people about Vietnam, right? Here was the successful battle, not true. Here's how many troops were killed, not true. Here's how many Vietnamese were killed, not true. Here's how many, you know what I mean? All this stuff is just like lie after lie after lie after lie. And you also had in 69 and 70, the Nixon administration just unilaterally, meaning on their own, deciding we're now going to carpet bomb the countries of Laos and Cambodia, which neighbor Vietnam. Because they had some intelligence or some idea that, like you'll do, that the Vietnamese were using territories in Cambodia and in Laos to fight, right? And it's sort of like if we were invaded, if the United States were invaded and our military decided to like snake through Canada and do whatever, or like cut through Mexico, you know what I'm saying? Like, so they made the decision to basically, I mean, they turned Cambodia into the surface of the moon, essentially. I mean, it's like the bombing of Cambodia and of Laos was so extensive and so overwhelming, and yet was kind of in a way the secret war, because no one was really reporting on it or talking about it. And so Congress is like, okay, hold on a motherfucking second. You can't just start bombing other countries,
Sure you can.
and you're not supposed to. And this is what Congress is saying. And generally, like, Congress had it's like, if you would have just asked us and given the evidence as to why we should do this, you didn't even have to do it publicly, at least consult with us in secret. We get the national security questions, but you can't just do it, right? You can't just do it. The Constitution exists. There's a separation of powers. Yes, you're commander-in-chief, but that only goes so far, okay? So the 1973 War Powers Act says the president cannot unilaterally go to war without the approval of Congress. Now, sketchy. Not sketchy. It's complicated. The War Powers Act recognizes that there are going to be times when the president, based on the intelligence they receive, has to act quickly. They can't wait for a congressional declaration, and then you've got this jerk senator from wherever who's trying to tie on a clean water bill to the legislation, right, or something. You know, I want to name the local post office after Elvis Presley, and I'm not voting for the war. You know, I don't know what. You know, but okay, we understand that the congressional process can be long and messy. The president needs to act immediately. Okay. So the War Powers Act says you can do it. You can send troops overseas in a military capacity for a period of either 60 to 90 days. But at the end of that time, you need to come to Congress and say, the war's going great. We just need a little more money. We need some more time. Will you give it to us? And Congress can then say yes or no. And if Congress says no, you got to start the withdrawal, like get the troops home, right? Which seems politically like a really difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like our
Like,
troops are
what
now in
happened?
harm's way. We're fighting this noble effort to liberate the people of whatever, or to stop this awful murderous regime. Maybe it's Syria or whatever. And like, you're going to tell our troops to come home? And, you know, and a lot of, you also have other questions about what military spending means for the districts around the country, congressional districts. If we're at war, that means we need military equipment. And we need to put people to work. Dwight Eisenhower president, after in the 1950s, talked about this. He's like, we got over 3 million people who are working directly in the defense establishment. There are jobs. People are making bullets. They're making coffins. They're making army boots. They're rations. You've got people who are serving food at little McDonald's outlets at military bases across the globe. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's this whole economic engine making the military possible. And it's very hard to say we're going to cut that, right? Just like we talked about this before. How difficult is it to like cut military bases or to get rid of military bases and what those mean for different districts? Anyway, that's the purpose. The president doesn't have the unilateral power to go to war without a declaration or without support of Congress. Okay? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. And the context is really critical. In fact, if you look at the 1970s, you had Senate hearings and House hearings that uncovered a whole lot of really nasty, like the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency. They are not allowed to do anything against any American citizen on our soil. That's the FBI's job. The CIA's job is overseas. Well, presidents have been using the CIA to target political enemies here in the United States. And they were like, you can't do that. Can you assassinate world leaders or elected officials in other countries? You're not supposed to do that either. We had been doing it, right? We uncovered all of this stuff. Congressional hearings uncovered all of this stuff that was happening and had been happening for decades, right? Going back to FDR. You know, again, Democrat and Republican, like everybody was involved in this. And so the War Powers Act is a way to say, okay, the presidency has gained all of this power around this one area of going to war. We need to scale that back a little bit. Okay. Has it been effective? Most of us would argue that it hasn't. But its goal was to limit the power of the presidency and to bring Congress to, correct this imbalance of power and to give more power to Congress in the decision of when do we go to war and when don't we.
Why do the president's policy goals often conflict with the Congress?
What's that?
Why do the number 19?
I want to just quickly say, the War Powers Act is a very specific thing, but it speaks to this larger question, right? We have separation of powers. Power is not static. Power is not static. It doesn't just stay the same. Sometimes the presidency has more, sometimes Congress asserts more power. Within administrations, you've got George W. Bush as president with Dick Cheney as vice president. For a lot of folks who kind of understood what was happening, they looked at Cheney and said, that's the president. Cheney had so much power and so much influence and an institutional power. He had historical institutional power going back to the 60s. Like, that dude knew how stuff worked, right? And George W. Bush was this, kid from Texas who was able to buy a baseball team and then become governor of Texas, and now he's president. Cheney, as vice president, was a really fantastic, whatever you think of Cheney and Bush and that whole crew, Cheney was a great choice for Bush because it said, to everybody in kind of the establishment, this is a guy who knows how to do this. He knows how things run. Whatever you think of me, look at him, And Cheney would always insist, George W. Bush is the president, I defer to him. It's okay. But if you're in the room with somebody who's kind of a genius, it's hard not to also defer to them, you know what I mean? So their power is moving constantly, it's shifting constantly, right? And it can change, for a lot of reasons it can change and shift. So that War Powers Act reflects this shifting. It reflects Congress trying to address a power imbalance that had been happening over the course of several decades and shift some of the power back to Congress. When Reagan is elected in 1980, a lot of the people who are supporting Reagan in terms of the establishment, the people who kind of run the country, like it because Reagan is saying, we screwed up a lot in the 70s. We gave way too much power to Congress. We questioned our military's role in the world. Like, we got to pull back from that. Okay. And so the shift of power began going in the other direction. Yeah.
An effective head of government is expected to,
Okay.
I put, act as a symbol for all Americans.
No.
I know, it tells me it's wrong.
Right.
But I'm
Okay. Yes.
So would it be to leave the House and the Senate?
That's head
alone?
of state. To act as a symbol for all Americans, that's sort of like, okay. Again, I'm going to go back to George W. Bush standing on the rubble, standing on the, after the attacks of 9/11. And Bush saying, like, we hear you, the nation hears you, the world hears you, right? That's Bush being sort of a symbolic representative of the country as a whole.
So that's
When there's an awful catastrophe overseas, one of our allies suffers, whatever, there's an awful terrorist attack, or it doesn't have to even be that, it could be a natural disaster, right? And like, hey, the people of the United States are with you, whatever you need, we're there, let us know, we got your back, and right, like that's a head of state, where like your job is to represent all of us, right? Whoever voted for Trump gets into office with like less than a majority of the votes, right? Regardless, we still expect Trump during certain situations to act as a head of state, meaning I'm representing all Americans. I'm not here as the head of my party, I'm here as the representative of everyone in the country, right? So that's the head of state.
Head of government.
Head of government is, are you an effective administrator? When you look at what the role of government is, and particularly the executive branch administering and enforcing laws, are you good at that? Are you effective at that? Okay, so that's different. It's one thing to give a speech that's rousing and that brings us all together in a time of crisis. That's head of state.
So
Head of government is that you're an effective administrator of the government. Like, what is the government supposed to do? Well, the Social Security checks haven't gone out for 3 months. Like, hey, President, what the hell are you doing? Like, you're a bad head of government. Do you know what I mean?
So it has nothing to do with, so, okay. Okay.
They intersect in a way, right? But I mean, it's yeah, they're separate, they're different roles.
Like, act as a symbol for all Americans,
Mhm.
as head of state, and then head of government would be leave the House and Senate alone in legislative process.
What do you mean? Say that again, I'm sorry.
Leave the House and Senate alone in the legislative process.
No. Because the president is also, we can think of them as chief legislator.
Okay.
Right?
So that's why I was like.
Yeah.
this doesn't make
So, on the one hand, we have Congress representing all the diverse interests of the country, from states to individual districts in the House. And the president, though, also has a vision for what they want to do, right? Let's say Sanders gets elected president, okay, he wants Medicare for all. Well, Sanders has to effectively work then with Congress. Sanders can't just say there and be like, I want it now, right?
Right.
He's got to be able to work with people in the House. What do you guys need? What are you interested in? How can
It's a head of government.
how can I
Yeah,
cobble
so-
together like this enough support to get done what I want to get done,
Okay, so I
right? Yeah.
What about number 4?
Conflict between the president's role as the head of state and the president as political. Yeah, essentially that. There are times when we need the president to represent all of us and be sort of a symbolic representative of the entire country and speak for everybody and not get into like, well, my political opponents are jerks and blah, blah, blah. Like, leave all that aside and just represent the country as a whole, right? And that's hard to do because we're in a political culture and politics is what gets him there and the president there and what gets them the power that they have, right? Like, how successful are they politically? But it has to do with more, okay, think of it like a family, right? When you're out and as a family and you're talking about what your family is doing, you try to speak in a way that not that one person is necessarily the head of the family, but do you know what I'm saying? Like you speak on behalf of the family and you try to do it in a way that's
Doesn't undermine it.
doesn't undermine anybody. You don't go out and be like, yeah, my freaking wife, get a load of this. No, like, you know what I mean? It's like, whoa,
Yeah.
man, what are you doing? You know, or you get what I'm saying? You want somebody to, now whatever the power struggles are in the house, at home is another thing, right? That's political, but the idea of being the head of state is something else. Okay. So Trump, for example, seems to have a very difficult time separating these two. When something happens, whether it's the coronavirus or Hurricane Maria, devastating Puerto Rico, over 3,000 people killed, those are moments where you want a head of state, right? You don't want someone to take that and turn it into something political, where you're targeting your enemies or you're talking about the people who are your opponents, right? Trump seems to have a hard time with that. Like, kind of anything that comes up, he uses it as a way to criticize his political opponents. Okay, so that's tricky. And you know what? Again, we're in a different time. Maybe that's cool, right?
So
Maybe people like that, right?
So the head of state is like a face of something.
Yeah, it's the face.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're going to go here and you're going to represent us, right? When Trump goes to a meeting of NATO or the G7, right, the 7 or 8 like richest economies in the world, or goes to the United Nations, like you're there, you're supposed to represent the entire country as a whole. Don't go there as a Republican. You're going as an American,
Right.
okay? And we've selected you to be the American that represents us. Go represent the entire country. Leave that political petty shit out of it,
Right.
okay?
Can you touch a little on the expectations gap?
Yes. I mean, just look at any presidential campaign, right? I mean, if you look at what Biden is promising, what Sanders is promising, what Trump is going to promise and has promised, I mean, it's all this stuff where you're like, are you running for king or are you running for, you know what I mean? What they're promising often doesn't reflect the reality of what they can do. You've got a Senate and a House. You've got a judiciary who's going to hear challenges on the legislation you can get passed.
And
Like,
the public.
yeah. So the public is like, well, we voted for you.
Knowing that you were going to
We want-
this.
Well, not just that. It's a lot of us, I think, culturally, we look at the president unrealistically and expect them to be able to handle all this stuff and to do all this stuff. And that's not the way the system is set up. The system is set up where you've got 3 somewhat co-equal branches of government, and there's a process and there's institutional structures and all this stuff, and like the president has to deal with that. Bernie Sanders, if they're elected, cannot go in and just say, great, day 1, here's Medicare for all. Or day 1, here's free public colleges and universities, no more tuition. There's got to be a legislative process that happens in order to make that work. And if it doesn't work, those who voted for Sanders are going to be like, what the hell, man?
Yeah.
You promised this. And it's like, okay, well, if you watch any of these debates or hear any presidential candidate, they're not saying, I'd like to do this. Of course, it all depends on if the House and the Senate are there. So who knows what the hell I'm going to do.
That's when I get into office.
Yeah, they're saying like, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. It's like, how? Like those of us who are like political scientists are going, oh really? How are you going to do this? Pray tell. You know, like I don't know why it's that voice, but you know what I mean? Like that's not how the system works. But for a lot of us, the president is the ruler of the country, you know? And so the expectation is that they can get this stuff done, and they can't, you know? And that's understandable. We focus on the one person. Going back to Martin Luther King Jr., when we think of the civil rights movement, we think of one person. Maybe 2 people. It's Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks. When we think of Rosa Parks, it's like, oh, she did this. No, she didn't. She did this one thing. It was an important role, but you had hundreds, thousands of people who were working on that, right? Doing the grunt. We don't know their names. We don't have any concept of how many hours they put into that bus boycott or the March on Washington or any of this stuff. We just focus on King. We just focus on Parks. And we got to get away from that, you know. It bothers me.
But that's all that we're provided with, in a way. Do you understand what I mean?
To an extent,
Like
yeah.
for
Yeah.
you, knowing all of this and like
Mhm.
having that knowledge and being like, oh, know what, I do respect, but you also have to acknowledge that these people
Yeah.
also worked under this, or how many
Sure.
hours. Like for me, you telling me this, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, cool, I know that. Or like I didn't know that, but now I do.
Mhm.
But me just hearing about Rosa Parks, I'm like, yeah, go her Rosa Parks. I don't know, and
Yeah.
I don't have.
It doesn't take anything away from Rosa Parks. I don't
Yeah,
want to do
yeah,
that.
exactly.
What she did was dangerous and like serious. But it's also, you're
There's more to
recognizing that any change, like all of us have something that we'd like to see happen. Okay? And whether you like what happened or you don't like what happened, if you look at any significant change in our society and you look at how it happened, there's a simple story of FDR gave us the New Deal, right? Or Martin Luther King Jr. did this, or President Johnson passed these civil rights acts. Underneath that or behind that are thousands of people who have been working for years to try to push this, right? It's not FDR giving us the New Deal. It's FDR looking at the United States and seeing workers all over the country walking out, right? 6 women who work at did we talk about this? Like 6 women who work at like a soda fountain, like drugstore kind of thing, corner their boss, take the keys from him, push him out the door and lock the door, and then call the union and like, hey, we just kicked the boss out and took his keys. What do we do now? And the union's like, okay.
Is
That was
the story?
Yes, that was
Why did
happening
it
all
happen?
over the place. What?
Why?
Because the boss was a jerk and they wanted to unionize and they wanted better working conditions or higher pay, or they wanted the Friday off after Thanksgiving, whatever it was, right? They're not getting what they want. No, that's huge. That the head of the UAW used to walk into negotiations and they'd have all the middle management who weren't unionized at Ford saying, hey, Frank, or whoever the president of the UAW is, don't forget about the Friday after Thanksgiving, because if the UAW got the Friday after Thanksgiving off, so would all middle management, right? Like, yeah, so you've got, I mean, this was all happening in the 30s, and FDR's New Deal is in part a way to like, oh shit, we got to calm this down. Like, how do we kind of like make this shift? FDR doesn't do that if people across the country are not organizing and pushing for, and you know, just kind of bringing the economy to a standstill. You know, so any change you want to see, look at the change that has happened. You're going to see all kinds of organizing and pressure below the surface that doesn't get reported on. In the history books, it's the single person who does it. There's more to it, right? Obama comes out in support of gay marriage. He wasn't in support of gay marriage at the beginning of his presidency. Maybe personally he thought he was, but what you had was this kind of like mass movement of people across the country who are like, it's time to shift here. There's no moral or there's just no reason to deny people this right? And you've got, if the whole country was like, whatever, we don't care. Obama doesn't do anything. Obama doesn't shift. He doesn't push for it, right? Does this make sense? Okay. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, we're out of time. We spent so much time on the coronavirus and
That's
everything
okay.
else. Okay. So take the quiz again if you haven't, or if you want to take it, send me an email and let me know if you want to have another attempt at it, if you already did, and we'll adjust accordingly. Thursday, we'll drill down a little bit into the presidency a bit more, and then we'll also start getting us set up for the following week. Can I ask you something? How many of you voted today?
I did not.
How many of you are going to vote?
I'm not gonna.
1, 2, 3. Really? 4? Okay.
Nice.
You're not voting?
Just for the
Oh, you're not in the, yeah, it's a Democratic primary, so it's not like a real life. Some of us are not Democrats or not. Actually, in Michigan, it's an open thing, so if you want to pick one of those, you're able to do it whether you're a Republican or independent or not. But let me say this. There are about 7 million eligible voters in Michigan.
Not even half that's gonna vote.
If half of it voted, political scientists would be writing about it for 100
Right.
years.
That's why I said not even
It's
half.
going to be about 16%.
Yeah.
Maybe
Wow.
20% of
Wow.
eligible voters are going to vote. So it's one of those things where, like, does my vote count in an election like this? Yeah, it
Yes.
does.
But those are going to be the people that
You know?
complain about the next president or
Of
whoever,
course.
whoever's running.
Leave that out of it. You have an opportunity to pick between two admittedly imperfect, but nonetheless, like, even if you support Trump,
Yeah, vote
if you're a
for
Trump
one who's
supporter,
gonna win.
go vote in the Democratic primary. Because if you think Sanders, for example, like, oh, Trump is going to crush Sanders, go vote for Sanders. You know what I'm saying? Or if you think if you think Trump's going to crush Biden, go vote for Biden. Like, I would do that. You know, I vote in the Republican primary and the Democratic primary because I want to shape this thing. You know, like, so I urge you to do it. If those of you who can't or whatever, but if you weren't planning on it, give it another thought. And the funny thing is when you go, there's still like 20 names on the ballot. I'm like, where's the candidate? I'm like, I got to go through all these people that have dropped out, so it's a little confusing. But anyway, have a good one. We'll see you all Thursday.
Hi.
Hi. Yes.
My sister's gonna because of
Your sister is in there.
remember how I was living
Good luck with today's lesson.